I don't know which of the realities you're watching me from, but I hope it's the good one. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insight into the creative process of storytelling. Howdy, folks. I don't know which one is the good one anymore, though, after this movie, because it's such a mind bender. One of these realities is good, or maybe both of them are good, and they should be blended. I don't know. Here's all I do know is that I have writer-director Mike Cahill with me, and doing this interview was a blast. It was a blast for a lot of reasons. First off, in case you missed it, on social media and through my email list, this was a early preview screening online for folks to tune into the movie Bliss. So Amazon Studios was really cool. They made a specific amount of digital seats available so people could actually watch the movie in advance. And then since Mike is in Croatia, we weren't really able to do that live Q&A thing. So we did a pre-recorded interview that then ran right after the movie, after the folks finished it online, which was really cool. So first off, if you want to sign up for future events like this, because I hope to be doing them again, you could go to backstory.net/events. And on that site, on that page is a place that you could sign up to receive emails from me. No, your name and address is not given to anyone else or sold to anyone else. It's just from Backstory Magazine. And you'll be kept in the loop as to what we're doing and get invites when we're doing online events like this. So that's the place to sign up. But what was honestly kind of fun about it was Mike's been in the screening series before, as most of you know, and we hadn't caught up in a while. And being quarantined kids as we are, we have a 2-hour chat, which was really just kind of amazing. And Mike was just so generous with his time, because he always is. And he got so into his process and what the different pieces of the movie mean to him. And more importantly, also as an artist, the things that he did not want to define meaning to. So this was just like a blast of a chat. In case you didn't know it, these are going on to the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, so you could watch these Zoomcast chats there. And of course, as always, they are still going into iTunes and Spotify as the Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast. So I don't know how you're viewing it, but I just wanted each of those two worlds to know about the other. Look, Mike was very generous with his time, so I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine. We recently published issue 42. You could read us on a desktop or laptop, and there are so many cool things in issue 42 that you cannot find anywhere else in the world except inside of our pages. So I do hope you check us out. You could check out the table of contents at backstory.net. You could also read excerpts there for free at backstory.net. Heck, you could even read an entire free issue at backstory.net. And you could read us on a desktop or laptop, or through an iPad app. And if you decide you like us, you could then use coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 off a 1-year subscription at backstory.net. And your credentials will still get you into the iPad app also, but you can only use that code at backstory.net. So look, there's a lot of great stuff in there, and it would mean the world to me to have you support my passion project. So thanks for considering. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into this amazing interview right after good old Amazon Studios styled us with a free screening online for folks. And we sat down to interview writer-director Mike Cahill about Bliss. Okay, so Mike, how's it going, buddy? It's great to see you.
It is going excellent. How are you, man? It's so good to see you. It's been 7 years. 6 years?
It's been a moment. It's been a quick moment. But
not since we've chatted, but since we've been sitting together in the same room, I think.
Yes. And like I was actually listening back to a part of our last podcast for iOrigins, and it's just like hearing the crowd and you like cracking a joke, like, damn it, I missed that. So I'm glad that we're able to see you, because you're right now in Croatia. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So we spent a lot of time over here. It's beautiful.
That's awesome. I love that we're still able to come together under these crazy circumstances. How is quarantining in Croatia going for you?
Yeah. When we came here, there were very few cases. Actually, there were 0 cases for 2 weeks straight. And when the rest of the world was sort of really going through a big chunk of it. But now it's, everybody's dealing with it. I think the whole world's kind of connected by this in a major way, but we're doing all right. We're getting by. We feel grateful. We feel,
All right, good.
We go walk by the sea and, look at the forest.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay. Well, I'm
How are
glad
you doing, man?
well, so
where are you? You're in LA?
I'm still in LA. And our motto here in Los Angeles is let's close down when the numbers get bad, which is good, as we should. And then let's reopen to try and help get the numbers bad again, which is a bad idea. Don't do it. We need to be closed down a little longer, and we need to support our frontline people with stimulus so they can stay at home. That's what I'm hoping we see happen soon. All right. So I've interviewed you a bunch of times, but like, to give people a baseline for a while, and I know that you might not remember this, but what is it that you think drove you to become a filmmaker? What was your earliest memory of saying to yourself, I want to be a filmmaker?
I started young. I got the bug very, very, very young. I probably told the story many times, but when I was about 6 years old, my mom gave me a Fisher-Price Pixel Vision camera.
I have one downstairs. I love those.
No kidding, really?
Yes, and just for our viewers and listeners, in case you don't know what Pixel Vision is, it was a Fisher-Price camera that records on audio cassette rather than film or video cassette, and it has the strangest look about it in black and white.
Yeah, it's kind of aesthetic.
I love Pixel Vision.
So beautiful, actually. It's like its own very small window of time in the history of, whatever that was, 83 or 86 or 85.
Now, of course, neither of us were alive then, so it's just like, a time travel thing. But okay. Well, so what were you filming on Pixel Vision?
So the thing about the Pixel Vision is that there's no editing software. You record a shot, you hold down the button and it records, and then you let go, and then you hold down and let go, and hold down and let go. And for me as a kid, I realized like that was edited. You're editing in camera. And I realized if you juxtaposed images together, you can do magic, right? And so I remember I had my younger brother sit in my mom's car pretending to drive. He was like, 4, and he was sitting pretending to drive. And I recorded that for 5 seconds. And then I recorded a Matchbox car being pulled with a string for 5 seconds. And then we went back into the car and recorded him pretending to drive, and going back and forth. When you would play it back, it felt like magic. It felt so cool. And that was kind of the bug. And so then I just kept doing it and trying and discovering all these little tricks. It felt like, it was a medium where the more you experimented with it, the more possibilities opened up.
It's interesting you say that, because I haven't heard somebody talk about that in a while, because it's so analog. But I would encourage today's filmmakers to challenge themselves with a short film where they try and do what you're talking about, which is in-camera editing. Because,
that's a wild idea.
Yeah, because like in film school, one of the things I remember was with Super 8 cartridges, right, of Super 8 film. Yes, we were able to edit them, but there was definitely a challenge. One cartridge equaled 3 minutes. And they said, do a film, no edits, all in camera editing, like that is less than 3 minutes. And I remember doing that and really having to plan it out. So you're right. It gives you a great sense of planning.
Yeah, it does. It really does. And you do shot, reverse shot, like literally, like you say your line, you say your line, you say your line, you listen, and you keep talking. Like it's amazing. It's a fun challenge, and you can discover. Again, it feels like discovering fire or discovering the wheel. All
right. So IP, intellectual property, that's what everybody's always trying to adapt. And what's so fascinating about your career is that you've successfully made 3 science fiction films not based on IP. It's not based on previously existing projects or books or novels, comics, whatever. You are creating your own science fiction. And I really admire that. I'm curious, what were some of your science fiction influences?
It's so funny. I was just about to say, I guess the IP I'm using for Bliss is from 2,400 years ago. It's called Plato's Cave, Plato's Republic, the Plato's Allegory of the Cave, which has been which is interesting. I don't know if this is interesting or not, but that story, for those who are not familiar with it, it's about a prisoner. It's like it's a short story about a prisoner in a cave. And the idea is that a bunch of prisoners, they were born in a cave. They lived their whole life in a cave, and all they knew were the shadows on the wall. There were like objects on the wall that were the shadows. And one day the prisoner breaks free and gets to turn around and sees like, whoa, actually those shadows are from objects. There's a fire that's casting those shadows. And then they walk around and they actually exit the cave, and then they see there's this whole world outside. There's fields and there's, rivers and the ocean and beautiful food and beautiful air. And it's like amazing. The world's amazing. And they go back inside and tell the other prisoners and so on and so forth. And this story has been, and I realized actually when I was pitching this to Amazon, when I was pitching Bliss to Amazon, this story has been told so many times in film. It's obviously most famously told as The Matrix. Everyone knows The Matrix.
Right.
But it's also The Truman Show. It's also Shutter Island. It's also The Conformist. Dark City, A Clockwork Orange, the Lego movie. Like you think about, it's like the Horton Hears a Who. It's the story inside of a story. And for me, I think the reason why, and it's above genre, it doesn't have to be science fiction. It could be comedy, it could be drama, but it feels like it's one of those existential like questions. It even predated a lot of religions back in 380 BC. So, that even that idea that the world has been created and it's inside of something else, or there's something more beyond it. I think that certainly is something that it is part of my life. Like that, I feel like I am suspicious about reality for sure, and so that is very inspiring to me, I guess.
But
as it would be.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about that, but I mean, I was going to ask this later, but we could talk about it now. One of the things that's so interesting, and we're not in the spoiler section yet, obviously, but your previous films in I Origins and Another Earth, your type of science fiction is a reality that's just around the corner, right? It's the near future. And you actually strive really hard to maintain a reality where these events could occur. But what's so interesting about Bliss is within the first, 8 minutes or so, you are telegraphing that the audience is supposed to be completely unsure of which reality they're in and which reality they should take seriously, which is fascinating because it is a departure from you of your previous style. And so
it's interesting that you pointed that out. You just made me think of something, which is this. There's certain science fiction stories that the whole world is vast and strange and unfamiliar. And there are certain science fiction stories where maybe one element, one piece is changed, but the rest looks like our reality. And in either way you go, for me, I feel like the stories that are the strongest are the ones that are not ones that say imagine yourself in this situation. Like you shouldn't. I'm not that excited about being like, imagine you were walking across the surface of Mars and you ran into a strange three-headed monster. Like I'm more interested in the stories that reveal something about us here and now and use science fiction as kind of like a lever to open up that, to like widen, or almost like a microscope. It allows you to zoom in on a very specific thing that we're dealing with right now here as humans, who we are. And so the relatability factor or the recognizability of oneself in that predicament is not a stretch. It's not necessarily like an adventure story. It's not an adventure story where you go far away and find yourself back at home renewed, being like, oh, I look at home differently. But it's a way to, I'm really drawn towards these stories that one thing has changed and who the human issues are things that are very relevant to.
Well, yeah. And I think that's what's really important to note is at the core of serious science fiction, there is a human element, especially a societal element, just like in a great Twilight Zone. There was always, they could be fantastical, but there was always a core human societal element that everybody could relate to and that they were commenting on, more importantly. And that's what made Twilight Zone so great. And that's what I admire in your work, in which you are doing what many people don't think should be possible, especially with Another Earth, your first, movie. You are making low budget but high concept science fiction, and you're proving that you don't need special effects. We're going to talk about it later, but funny enough, you know, this movie Bliss, that's the most special effects you've ever had in any of your works, because the other ones, they're so in the background, and here they needed to be in the foreground. But before we get there, because I want to get to the spoiler section soon, but I would be remiss, you know, it is fantastic to see you. And all I've been thinking about all week is Sundance, where we met. I walked right up to you after a screening of Another Earth, and I told you about my screening series, and you and Britt Marling, your co-writer and star, were like, hey, let's do that. And we did. And Britt's been back multiple times, and you've been back multiple times. And I miss you, because as Sundance is happening this week, it brings back all those great memories. Tell me, what's your favorite Sundance memory? And just for our listeners that don't know, in case you've never seen Another Earth or I Origins, Mike is one of the few people that could say that they have won Sundance's Alfred P. Sloan Award twice. And that's the Alfred P. Sloan Award is for excellence in science. So you've won that twice for your science fiction films. What is your favorite Sundance award? Your favorite Sundance memory?
My favorite Sundance Award. Well, out of all the Sundance Awards I have. Yes, no, it's so beautiful. It really, truly is beautiful to see you. And I was saying earlier, like, I think what you do for this industry is so important and so beautiful. Like, you keep this burning flame, like, especially screenwriting and just how stories get made and the creative process behind the making. And that's, you know, it's a gift that you give to so many people. Like, it's a really beautiful thing to do that. So,
thanks, man. Thanks for the kudos. Tell me your favorite Sundance memory.
Well, my favorite Sundance memory, I had very beautiful experiences there. I mean, they're life-changing, really. And it's like doubly life-changing in many ways, because both of the experiences there. But I think really the one that opened my eyes the most was when Another Earth played at Eccles for the first time. Because, you know, it was just, you didn't know what to expect. So it was all unknown terrain, and to see people connect to it, that was really, really, it was amazing, because it felt like when you do this work, or when you do this, your first audience really is yourself, and you try and judge whether you're moved by it or not moved by it. And that's, in some ways, you don't really know. You just don't know if it's going to connect, but you do know if it connects with you. And if you can feel that, that's really you start to have this relationship with the material. And to see other people have the relationship with the material was just a really, you know, like one of those euphoric connections to many people at once.
It's an intense experience. I mean, for anybody that doesn't know, Mike's talking about the Eccles Theater, which is part of a high school in Park City, and it seats 1,200 people. So when you have a film that makes it to Eccles and they go on a rotation of theaters, it's kind of a big deal, because you are seeing how 1,200 people are reacting to your movie. So I mean, it's fun and terrifying. I guess the thing that I would point out that I remember talking about Another Earth, but you know, before we move along, was, to my memory, you were shooting that in either spring or summer right before that Sundance. So it was within, like, right the year before that technical Sundance that it debuted on. And that was something that a lot of filmmakers can't do, because they weren't able to get out and film in the pandemic in 2020. How long was your shoot on Another Earth again? Because I remember it was mega short. And then if you could remember what time of year you shot, I would love to just have that info again.
Yeah, it's hard to remember now. It's been over a decade, but I feel like it's probably been 10 years. But I think the shoot was probably around 30 days, but there was gaps in it, right? So like we did it. Yeah, it was very stop and go. I remember, because we started with nothing. Like, we started with nothing at all. We had a camera that a friend of ours loaned us. And, you know, our families, like, you know, like all locations that were just friends and family. And we shot maybe 10 days worth of material and pieced that together. And then we started building a bigger team, and sort of a wonderful group of people started surrounding the project and sort of helping it get birthed. So I think it was probably 30 days over certain periods, but I do remember, like, for example, there's a scene in the snow where Britt walks through the snow, and we shot it in 3 different locations, one in the winter, one like when the winter was sort of ending, and one was like way in the spring where there was no snow. And we were like driving around trying to find snow somewhere in Connecticut. And we were calling all the ski mountains being like, hey, do you guys still make any snow? Are you still open? And we found one that was like, we're closed for the season, but there's a little bit of snow still on the hill. And we're like, we're coming. And we drove like, an hour and a half to get like a little bit of snow.
That's awesome. I know that one of the things you've done other than iOrigins, which we'll just ask one question about in a second, like is television. You were on The Magicians and The Path. Yeah. And that was kind of new for you since the last time we talked. Just briefly, what was your most important lesson as a TV director?
Those experiences were amazing. Magicians, Sarah Gamble and John McNamara were the showrunners and brilliant writers and so funny and so sharp and just it was amazing collaborating with sort of new voices that were different but exciting. You know what I mean? And then same with The Path. It was Jason Katims and Jess Goldberg. It was really I learned a lot. It was a fun experience. Also, you just sort of see how other people tell stories. You get to kind of like ride in the car with somebody else and be able to participate with that. And for me, I feel like that opened my horizon a little bit. I also got to experience, oddly enough, those television shows, they were pilots. And so the budgets were 10 times bigger than my independent films. You know what I mean? So it was like, usually you think of TV as less expensive than films, but they were actually bigger, more, we hired hundreds and hundreds of people, right, as opposed to having 12 people. It was like it really helped my development as a filmmaker in a wonderful way. And I credit all of them for bringing me on board. I was really, really, really fortunate.
Well, so for iOrigins, the last time you were in the screening series, your last feature, one of the things that we've been talking about for a few years, ever since you told the story in our Q&A screening, is that iOrigins is technically a sequel to I. And of course, you could listen to all this. The podcast is still up in iTunes and Spotify for iOrigins. But the most fascinating thing was there was this long story about how you were originally trying to make a screenplay called I. Fox Searchlight bought it, sat on it. It got trapped in development hell. You decided that you could take a part of that backstory from the original screenplay and make it into your movie, iOrigins. I know I'm rushing through a lot of fun content here about how that conversation went. But what was so fascinating was after iOrigins came out, it had good critical reviews. And one of the things we talked about is, could the science fiction film that you originally set out to make, I, ever get made? And we've talked on and off about publishing it in Backstory Magazine. And I know it's an early draft and that you still are tinkering with it. And I hope we possibly do that when you're ready, because it would be accompanied by an interview. So you could talk about where you want to take it. But is there been any movement on I? Have you gone back to it at all since the last time we've spoken?
Again, you inspired me, honestly, because in some ways I have many different projects in my mind at once, and like right now I have 2 new scripts that both of which I'm trying to even decide which to make.
That's great.
Next, that I'm really, really enthusiastic about. And so, there's like a time and place when it really strikes your inspiration. You're excited to make it, and then something else overcomes it and kind of steals your attention. But after our conversations, I did opened up the script and read it sort of with the spotless mind, like I was like, what is this? Like, I'm so curious. What is this amateur script here written back when I was 12 years old? And there was something to it that was really special and strong and exciting, and it's ambitious. It's hugely ambitious. And it's like, it almost lands, but not exactly. And then we even discussed recently with the producers, we were talking maybe turning it into a TV show. So they were recently saying like, sure, hey, you ever think about making a television series, like maybe an 8-episode miniseries of that script? So we all read it, actually. Everybody read I, and we're like, wow, this is kind of cool. There's something there. Like maybe if you build it out even further,
I can see that totally working.
Yeah, because I mean, the basic premise is this. It's, say, maybe 20 years into the future, reincarnation has been proven true by science. The eyes are the way that we find out. So when a baby's born, you scan the baby's eyes and you know who it was in the past. And
Mike just told you the entire plot of I Origins.
Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it yet, that's all right. I can discover it now. I'm not ruining too much, but and it opens up a lot of possibilities for, because there are certain people who, you wouldn't want to be in your past life. And then there's, which is really interesting. It's a way to look at regret and forgiveness. It's a way to look at how to grow. And then there's certain people who would leave their inheritance to their future selves as opposed to their kids. And there was all these like really kind of, and then there was things that never got resolved in one life that required two lives to resolve it.
That's my personal track.
Oh, there you go.
I need two lives to resolve what's going on in this life.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's funny. Gosh, there's so much to talk about. I realized that there's a new script I'm working on that is, in a weird way, it's about reincarnation, but not with a body, but with a robot. And
really? Okay.
It's very, very cool. I feel like sharing, gosh, you have so much wisdom. I feel like sharing like scripts with you just to read, to get your vibe on it, by the way.
Hey man, I'm down for it. Well, so I Origins TV series, by the time you were looking at the end of that, was there anything that you saw that you were like, yeah, maybe we'll do that, or no?
Well, yeah, the detail, I got the broad strokes are amazing, right? The broad strokes really, it seems to make a lot of sense. And it's dramatic, and it's, it captures a certain sense of wonder. There's like the discovery of who you were. That's always, it's kind of like it kind of feels like Quantum Leap a little bit,
Sure, right.
but reversed. And, but it was the detail I was getting stuck on the details, and, there's still potential. I would say there's still potential, but
we will talk about it more offline, because I want to get to Bliss right now for the rest of this damn episode.
Okay,
we're still in our spoiler section, but you started our non-spoiler section. You started to say that you were inspired by Plato for part of Bliss. How did Bliss, the rest of it, come together for you in a non-spoiler fashion? I mean, obviously we're talking about multiple realities, and we're talking about the possibility of soulmates, the possibility of family. Those are things that are all apparent from the trailer. And obviously the connection of transgressing between these realities via the use of some strange synthetic drug.
Like, I do have this sneaking suspicion that there's something that our status quo version of reality, there's something, it's not complete, obviously. That's why we have science. That's why we're that's why we're digging at the edges of quantum physics. That's why we're looking at as far out into space and trying to write the story of us and who we are. And at a fundamental level, I liked a story about somebody chasing an idea of perfection, go on. Perfection, because they're in a place of hardship and struggle, and they have this dream of perfection. They want to go after this thing, this idea of the good life, or something beautiful, or like a better something or other. And through the process, they come to not just give up on that desire for the perfection. They actually learn to love and embrace the chaos and the wildness. And it's sort of like Milton's Paradise Lost, where it's eating the apple and the fall from the fall of mankind is not actually bad. It's exhilarating. It's wonderful. Like that thing of you're chasing paradise, but then you ultimately not just deal with the chaos, you love the chaos. And I like that. I like that story. And so I felt like, I felt like I could create a framework that proposed two different worlds, and the major conflict being that each world is associated with a person. One is Isabel and one is Emily. And each one of those people are are offering up evidence to suggest the veracity of their world. Their world is the real world. The other one is just a simulation, or the other one is just a trip, right? And so they kind of pull us back and forth because we're living it through the protagonist's eyes in many ways. And we're supposed to sort of we oscillate between them, and that oscillation starts vibrating even faster and faster towards we get to the end, and then no more spoilers.
no more spoilers. But I mean, it's funny because the apple is something that we see in the movie. You know, Greg has an apple a lot, our protagonist, and you know, it's interesting to see, you know, a bite in one world is certainly different from a bite in another world. Just to put it, you know, blunt.
Oh, when he catches it's a peach, actually. It's a peach.
Oh, really? I thought that was an apple.
I know, it looks like it's hard. It looks like an apple.
Okay. Well, I was just going for the analogy there, but you know, you're talking about something else, about like something that writers talk about a lot when you talk about perfection. It's the concept of when you're writing a script and when it's done, it's progress versus perfection. So some writers can't end because they get stuck in the perfection loop. Like they cannot get it out there until in their minds it's perfect. But as we know, perfection is a finite concept, completely subjective anyhow. And if you're only perfecting your script, you're never going to get it out there. You're never going to get it made. If you're getting it out there too early, of course, don't do that. Don't send out your first draft, kids. But that concept of the battle between progress and perfection is definitely an inherent piece of writing. And talking about writing your craft, you know, since we're in the non-spoiler section, the most interesting thing about your process that I remember is that rather than doing a straight outline, you like to generally do what many people would call a scriptment, which is a treatment version of your script. And in the past, you've told me that you sometimes like to just get into prose form and write from the perspective of your protagonist. Like just tell us how you did that for Bliss. Was there any sort of a formal outline or treatment, or did you do another one of these long documents, like beginning to end, but all only through your protagonist's eyes?
It's interesting. Yeah, I guess I still sort of have that same process, which is I write from first person, and it's sort of like the throw up draft. That's why I write it in Microsoft Word or Pages or whatever. I write it in a Word document as opposed to final draft, just so I can ignore formatting. It's almost like painting, right? You're just throwing big, broad images onto the page, and trying to hit the major emotions, right? The details really don't matter because they will. I read something recently, which was that it's such a great quote, and I found it very, very inspiring. I would need to find it, but it was something about how the difference between science and art. And it was that scientists and the pursuit of science in general, it deals with the details, like the small bits and pieces of things, and the continuity of the whole is presumed in science. Okay. Whereas in art, it deals with the continuity, the big idea, the big flow, and the bits and pieces are presumed, right? So it's almost like once you can align with that idea, it actually feels very profound. It felt very profound to me, which is that when I write, I don't think about the bits and pieces so much, maybe some of the greater images, but some bits and pieces of dialogue, this and that. And but you were really trying to find the river and how it flows and what that final, like the whole, for me, the whole purpose of a film is the last couple of minutes. Everything is in service of that final transmission of an emotion, and everything is a path to make that land. And sure. And so, yeah, I guess the process is I'd write this huge document, and then I'd write a draft. And usually my first draft is like 75 pages, and it's really bad. And there's whole sections that just are like, figure this out later, and figure this out later, and figure this out later.
But again, Mike, that's beautiful because it's progress versus perfection. If you don't do, many people call that first draft a vomit draft. If you don't do it, you're never going to have a script. So it's painful for a lot of writers, but just, accept it. Enjoy the vomit sticking on the pages and keep moving forward, or you're never going to get your damn script done.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. And actually, I would almost avoid the details unless the details are kind of special to you for some reason. I'd almost avoid them because it's almost like you have a giant lens and everything's out of focus, but you want to, before you focus it perfectly, you just want to know what the shape of it is. You know, you want to know if it looks like an elephant before you, and then you zoom in, you'll figure out the hair on the tail or whatever, right? Like, don't worry about that.
Technical detail, just because people always forget this. You mentioned writing it in Microsoft Word, right? Because you wanted just like a document without format. If you ever find yourself at a place where you don't have Word, like if you're writing on an iPad somewhere, always remember there's a template in Final Draft that has no template. Like it's their text document. So you
really?
can always bust out one of those in Final Draft too. I'm sure you know this. I just thought I would technically say it for our listeners out there. Well, so when you sit down to write, do you give yourself a goal of when you're in Final Draft? Do you give yourself a goal of pages that you want to hit each day, or do you give yourself a goal of how many hours you want to write?
Neither. I try and find the time. Neither. It's a little bit more loose than that.
Okay.
But like I really like throw a net around the missile of inspiration. So that if there's one that's like flying like this, I'll like and ride on it, and I can not stop for 20 hours. Like I'll just, and then I won't do anything for a few days. So like I really like to grab onto inspiration. And maybe that's a bad idea for some people.
Great.
You know, show up, sharpen your pencils, and get to work. But I like to go on runs with the material, and if I'm feeling it, I don't like to stop.
That's fantastic.
Until life interrupts.
Yeah, when inspiration hits, you got to go with it. What do you do if you get writer's block? When you finally find yourself up against a wall? Just really briefly, how do you overcome that?
I go for a walk. I try and not think about it. You know, I actually stop and let the writer's block happen.
Well, so as we were talking about earlier, again, progress versus perfection. I didn't realize we were going to be leaning that hard into it today, but we are, damn it. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, it's one thing for a lot of writers to figure out that moment when they think that they're done. And on that path, they're getting notes from their friends, right? And their close colleagues. How do you figure out when your script is done and you want to get it out there for funding? And what's the notes process like for you? Because everybody handles notes differently.
I usually send it out to first Yelena reads it, my wife. And what's great about her is she has no problem saying it's pathetic, right? Like there's no we don't have to be polite with each other, right? If something doesn't work, she's very, very strict about it. Really harsh in a good way. And then my next round, usually I send it to, so now I've had this great fortune of working with these beautiful creative heads of department friends that I love. So like my cinematographer, I'll send it to him and we'll start like thinking about, you know, a visual language to develop. I'll send it to my composer and we'll start thinking about sounds, right? Cool. I send it to people who I creatively work with, really, actually. And everyone now knows my process, and I send it to my producer that I work with a lot. And everybody knows that, like, even the script that we begin to shoot is usually only about 60% of what the actual film turns out to be. Like we change it all the way through.
That's rare. And we'll talk about that once we're a little more into our spoiler section, but tell us about setting it up. Once you had a script that you wanted to do, was this something that you got independent financing for and later sold to Amazon Studios? Or was it something that originated with Amazon Studios before, you know, like they were sending you out into production?
This one, it started off, I just wrote it as a spec script, I guess. And then I sent it to Jim Stern, and who's the producer. And then we sent it to Amazon. And I'd known Ted Hope there. Ted Hope was brilliant. You know, Ted Hope's one of the great heroes of the independent film world. And he was legendary producer, beautiful human being, very, very smart, and, you know, a great producer, and then was an executive at this studio. And so we sent it to him, and he was greenlighting he was like making all these wonderful films there, you know, and he dug it, man. And he was like, you come on in and chat with everybody, and we'll see. And so, but that process of come on in and getting it to a green light was actually, it was like years. It was maybe 2 years. Yeah. I think it was end of 2017. was when he probably read it, and it wasn't until 2019 in the spring that I had my actual official pitch meeting. So and I'd worked on it a bunch since then, but like these cats are all like everybody's like preserving the core of it, you know, like we all recognize that there's like at a certain point we're dealing with what is the most effective way to catch that bird. You know, you want that beautiful, strange, emotional bird that the whole thing is about. You're on a safari, you're trying to capture it. Like we all know that that's what our goal is. And so it's all about the most effective ways to do that. So in some ways, like if you're not on the same page about what you're chasing, then the notes process is a fucking nightmare. Like it's terrible. But if you are all aligned on what you want to do with it and what you're trying to make, then everybody's like a great ally. And you know, like for me, like if things work or don't work, try them out. Or like I try not to be too precious about it.
Well, I mean, so how many drafts would you say it went through, like in your development process with Ted Hope and Amazon?
That I don't, like, maybe 4.
Okay. And
I could be lying. I don't know. It's over years. I probably didn't send them all. I probably, you know, it's a little messy. It's messy. It's messy.
We'll talk about that in the spoiler section a little. You could tell me a few of the changes. I guess the last question that I would have for you before we get to spoilers would be, what was your budget and schedule?
Our budget was around 15 million. There's like all these tax breaks and incentives and stuff, so it all kind of wiggles around. But it was like a low budget movie, more or less. But
it was about 15 million, you said?
Yeah, more or less.
That's great. And you shot all around the world. You shot in Croatia. So, I mean, where you live right now. So like, that's great too. And you would get tax credits there.
Right.
And
we got the LA tax credit too, which was a huge deal for us.
I was going to ask, cause we're still behind a little in California tax credits, but that's great that you guys were able to get one. Hopefully we're getting more of those going here. And what was your schedule? How long did you shoot for?
Our schedule was so tight. So when we first broke it down, my AD and I, we estimated that we needed about 33, 34, 35 days to do the film. We did it in 24 and a half.
Wow.
We couldn't, it was cheap. Like that money disappears very quickly. It's funny. Yeah. Like no matter how big or small the budget is, you realize like shooting a professional shoot in LA, like locations alone are $50,000 a day, something like that, something crazy. Right. So everything just gets, it's just,
well, you needed special effects in this film too. So, I mean, that was another concern. So right. It wasn't just production. You needed a big post budget.
Yeah, all of it. Yeah. I mean, it does add up, I guess. And, but so we had to figure out how to do it in such a short, like our shooting schedule was so tight. And I think another thing thinking back to the question about television is one of the things I learned there is like those shooting schedules are like 8 days or whatever, 9 days. And you do have to figure out how to jam through an hour's worth of a show in 8 or 9 days. That's very quick. That's very, very fast. And so you learn that preparation is key. Like I storyboarded like crazy. There was one day we shot the roller disco scene. The roller disco should have taken 3 days.
Oh, we'll be talking about that. Wow, you shot that in 1 day?
We shot that in less than 1 day.
Oh my God.
And we had, dozens of stunts and rigs and all. It was so complex. And it was storyboarded down to like 45 shots or whatever, storyboarded perfectly, rehearsed for months and months so that on the day, we were like, I don't know, different productions average different amount of setups per day per hour, like 1 setup an hour or 2 setups an hour. We were doing 1 setup every 15 minutes at our peak, and which is crazy. And there was even a time where we set up 3 stunts in a row, like basically like vignettes. We're like, we're going to do 1 stunt here, 1 stunt here, and 1 stunt here. And the Steadicam operator is going to film the first one. We're going to slide over, film the next one, and slide over, film the next one, just so we can knock the things down like dominoes. And it was all about preparation.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about that in the spoiler section for sure, because that is an elaborate sequence. And I guess that's a good place for us listeners. This was a cool thing in which Amazon Studios is helping us do an actual screening online, so people all over the United States are going to be able to see this film, and they'll be then watching our Q&A first as part of their advanced screening, and then it'll go public when the film's released. So that's cool. But for anybody that's listening post facto, if you have not yet seen Bliss, go see it in Amazon Prime Video, and it comes out February 5th. And then, press pause right here, go see it, and come back, because we are going to definitely talk about the spoilers now. So you have been forewarned. Okay, so here we are in the spoiler section.
What about that ending? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, now we can talk about all that stuff. So I think the biggest
what about that crazy part where the dinosaur runs through? Oh, no one was expecting that.
But by the way, you just made that as a joke. There is a dinosaur that comes through in your film, in the visual thoughts section. Absolutely.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh, there is. Right.
See, you thought you were making up something wild, and it actually is on his visual thought screen. Single
line drawing.
Here we go. So I'm going to start easy in the spoiler section, but now you can talk about the ending and everything else. What were some of the biggest left turns, especially in your Amazon development process, of like things that fans of the film would be surprised to learn? Oh yeah, at one point we were going to send it back in time, or at one point there was going to be a drug factory manufacturing that drug that they were going to interact with, or something that was an important part of your story for 5 months, but absolutely was never shot. So we're kind of looking for those early left turns.
I'll tell you the biggest one. It's not exactly the answer to your question, but it is kind of the answer to the spirit of your question, which is this. I'm just going to jump into it. That final scene. So when we finished the film and I showed it to Amazon, and Ted Hope was like, this is amazing. This is wonderful. We love this. This is great. And they were very supportive and so cool. The whole process was really, really lovely. The production process was really, really lovely. And he said, listen, if we really love this film, if there's anything you want, if you want to do something else, if we said, hey, we give you an extra day to shoot something else, would you write anything? Is there anything you feel like would make the movie even better? It was kind of like, like it was like Christmas. And I was like, okay, well, wait a second. And he's like, and if not, then nothing. That's fine. But just, put that in your mind, because we're a studio and we can afford things. And I was like, all right, well, what about this? The final scene of the movie was, I wrote that after watching the film, the reunion between the two.
I was going to ask about that later, because it seems like, because I could see your script ending. He's talking about the end of the movie when basically Greg's character, we are definitely in the spoiler section, kids, press pause if you haven't seen it. Yeah, but Greg's character has been bouncing back and forth between these two different realities. There's great arguments to be made for both of them being real, but he has decided to stay in our bitter, bad world, the grungy world, to have reconciliation with his daughter. And so the movie ends with him finally showing up to see. I'm flipping to my final page of questions because I didn't expect to be talking about this soon. But he finally shows up to the site, Safe Harbor Clinic, the Safe Harbor Clinic, which you, sir, I noticed every single time you did it, you were sneaking Safe Harbor Clinic references into every billboard, every window frame. There was on the sides of cars. There were little posters on walls about it.
How many times did you watch it?
Once, but
you are a very good viewer.
Well, but an avid viewer. Thank you, but I mean, like I realized like that was something, and we're going to talk about the whole drug thing in a second. But like it was interesting because your film really could end up in that room where he finally checks himself into a clinic, because drugs are a big part of this movie, as we're going to talk about, and there's just a slow creep shot. A lot of people would have this as a place where you monologue. And what I admire so much about your ending is that you don't monologue. People are going around in group therapy, and there's just a slow creeping shot. And
only dolly shot in the whole movie, by the way.
Right. And he takes out a picture of his daughter, and he says, I've decided that I think my daughter's real. And that's why I'm here.
This woman says, says, my daughter, and I believe her.
Yeah, this woman says she's my daughter, and I believe her. And it's such a beautiful ending. And it goes to black, right? The, of course, Sundance ending, cut to black. And so I was like, that really could be the ending. And the credits start to roll, and I'm like, oh, that is the ending, huh? But then you do come back with a coda. So what made you feel that there was something like missing? It wasn't something the studio made you do. It was totally your free choice. Is that what you're saying? It wasn't like,
yeah, no. It
wasn't like it tested bad and they said, you got to tack something on here.
No, what happened is okay, this is complicated. This is really in the weeds, but originally before he's in that room, in the script, before he's in that room, there's a scene where he calls her and leaves a message. Now, that scene is actually in the middle of the film. It used to be at the end.
Okay, I know the scene you're talking about because I was going to ask you. There's something really weird and blurry. There's somebody walking down the hallway in the background. You're talking about when he's at the payphone, yeah?
Yeah. So it just so happened he's wearing the same outfit for all of those scenes. It just
right.
And I was like, oh wait, and so I put that in the middle because I felt like emotionally we wanted to see him actually. Like before, in the script, he reached out for her, but he didn't leave a message because the phone was broken. He made like a less strong of an agency move towards connection,
right
before they eject. So this is the midpoint of the film. The film's very very specifically structured. So the way I structure a film is very mathematical. Like in many ways, there's 4 sections. There's Act 1. There's Act 2A, Act 2B, and Act 3, and each are 25% of the film. And when I write it, I don't really think about that. It's sort of in the back of my mind. But when I start shaping that screenplay, I know exactly what those moments are. And then when I do the edit, I actually instead of doing the old-fashioned like 18-minute reels, like I actually make my reels I make 4 reels. The movie's 4 reels, and each one ends like you could fade out and fade back in. So Act 1 ends with he stays in he instead of leaving the tarp home with Isabel, he decides to stay for dinner. They kiss. It ends with them kissing.
Okay.
And Act 2 begins with the introduction of the daughter and the son and her mission. So it's sort of like the B story. The complicating factor is now starting to emerge, and then we see this huge roller disco sequence, which is him really coming to accept Isabel's version of reality, which is that there's no moral implications to living in this world. Like you're like, and it's a slow.
It's like a video game.
Yeah, it's like and that thing's very well structured actually. How that roller disco happens, and then the midpoint they eject, and then through 2B. Things are really lovely, and he comes to the decision that he doesn't want to go back in.
Right, they're in utopia. 2B is utopia, basically.
Yeah, 2B is utopia, and then 2B towards the end of it, we start messing with utopia. It starts, it starts rupturing a little bit, and the simulation starts penetrating this reality, and the reason is they didn't have enough of these blue crystals. So Act 3 is Jack back in with the mission of getting enough to come back to bliss for forever. And the climactic moment is that they don't have enough for both of them, so they have to make a decision. Now, so before the ejection, so the ejection is kind of like an upping the ante, right? It's like Isabel's right. like he's like, listen, I may be in Plato's cave, and and these may be shadows on the wall, but I've lived my whole life and I have a relationship with these shadows, and I don't give a shit what you're saying. I actually care about the shadows on the wall. And so it's not convincing enough to me. And so she has to up the ante. She has to, in many ways, the yellow crystals that are like a science fiction.
Right. The synthetic drug that they're using.
Yeah, right. I don't even call it a drug. It's never mentioned drug as a drug in the script. It's like
sure.
Although you can put that reading onto it, but
they're essentially like pills that you take, you ingest them.
Right. But they have there's like a little digital component to them.
Right.
Like they're created.
Keto, her friend Keto is using a computer to analyze them and to make sure that they're okay.
Right. And so the yellow ones, in some ways, what they do is they allow the prisoners in Plato's cave to manipulate the objects and change the shadows on the wall. And then the blues are actually like a key to the handcuffs to allow you to leave. So before leaving, I realized I needed a stronger, when I was looking at the edit, I needed a stronger effort by Greg to acknowledge and try and reach out to his daughter. And that's what resulted in Isabel offering the ejection. So in the weeds. But then I realized, and I had one, which was at the ending, right before that final scene. And I put that earlier, and it worked really, really well. And so in the previous draft, in the first cut, he calls her right before he sits down in the clinic. And then right when he finishes his line, the phone rings, that cell phone. And it was like exhilarating because it's like, oh, she's calling back. And he gets up and he goes to the phone and they have basically a reunion on the phone, sort of. And then it cuts to black. And that was cool, but it didn't land perfectly for me. Because I don't know, for a lot of different reasons, but I felt like it would be exhilarating. It would feel more if you could see them hug or embrace. And so they were like, yeah, sure, we could shoot that. But it was during COVID, and the sort of meta irony of the whole thing is that scene, none of it's real. It's all shot on green screens. It's like your background right now. It's like it's MacArthur Park, but it's all fake. Like we shot them like because just COVID really? Shooting wise.
Wow, it looks great.
Yeah, it does look great. Yeah,
it does look great. Wow, that was some great color timing there in compositing. Well, that's cool. That's cool. I mean, that's cool that Amazon gave you the chance to add that coda, and it wasn't something that you were in any way forced to do, but really just like a tweaking of your own ending, which is awesome. Like I think all science fiction, like we talked about earlier, needs a heart and it needs a human connection. The most interesting thing about Bliss for me was that we do live in a society, unfortunately, where we're still in a drug endemic, like COVID has just been horrible for the world. And of course, really bad here in the United States with over 400,000 people dead. But before COVID even happened, we were losing about 50,000 people in America per year to the opioid crisis. And so there is a very sad and real, situation in America where knowing somebody that has lost their lives to drugs, and I don't even mean by dying, I just mean lost their lives to drugs, is a reality. And what's so fascinating is the character of Greg, his son Arthur later talks about like his drug addiction as kind of making fun of it. Like, oh, what hurts this week? Is it his shoulder? Is that why he needs that? Is it his knee? Is that why he needs that? And he's kind of referring the pills that we see Greg take in the beginning. And time itself in the movie just seems to collapse on itself, in which he's talking about his daughter's graduation. And when she finally catches up to him, even though not that much time has passed in the movie, she's like, yeah, I graduated 2 weeks ago. You missed it. And to cast Owen Wilson as the person that's going through this, when he has a public storied past run-in with drugs himself, I thought was very brave of him to take the role. And there's a lot of vulnerability that comes off just through his performance, which I thought was fantastic, because yes, this is a synthetic drug, and yes, it's an altered reality, but you could see the pain, and also the film's title Bliss, that he's getting of kind of getting away from his problems in those scenes, especially when he's in the utopia. And I'm just curious about the casting of Owen Wilson and the incorporation of drugs in there, because you don't see drugs in these kind of movies as often. And it used to be a very cyberpunk concept, the idea of synthetic drugs that do weird things. A movie just came out recently called Synchronic, which is an independent film where people take a drug that helps them time travel. And that's fascinating. But I thought your message about drugs, which is a very important message here, in which the last choice you make is taking that drug because of the way sometimes it takes over your brain, especially in the opioid family. It was a great thing to find in a science fiction film that I did not expect. So tell us about crafting that, and then about the casting of Owen Wilson for that added layer of vulnerability.
Yeah, it's all very, it's all so difficult to put into words, but I feel how do I say this? There's like I'm very drawn towards empathy, and I feel like if you look at the history, like I never want to be very explicit about it's funny. So like if you're going to say the movie's about drugs, one could say that, of course, absolutely. But I have to be very careful myself not to, I don't think it's fair of me to force a reading onto the film, because that is a reading of the film, right? You could call it escapism. You could call it any sort of like chasing a numbness. And if you look at the history of films great films that deal with addiction, like if you think about Leaving Las Vegas or Requiem for a Dream or
Lost Weekend,
Basketball Diaries. Yeah, there's Train Spotting. Man, these films are all so expertly crafted and brilliantly made. But I noticed there's this challenge in a challenge of empathy that it's almost like the quantum particles are hitting a wall and they can't do a quantum leap through it. And I was trying to think of like, okay, how do you, because no matter what, if you're watching a protagonist go through this very challenging and hard thing, addiction, and the sort of darker sides of it, if you personally haven't experienced that, you have a separation with your protagonist, right? You suddenly start watching them from a position that's not their position. When you see them like cold in an alleyway shaking, you can't, if you're not cold in an alleyway shaking, or you haven't been cold in an alleyway shaking, you're observing, there's a subject object, there's a separation suddenly, right? And I feel like the beauty of cinema is that you can walk hand in hand with the protagonist. You can literally like almost put their head on your head and walk with them. And so if they don't see, these are very subtle things. It's great that you're, so I don't want to explicitly say anything, but if you look at the filmmaking of the movie, right? The first moment when he's in the office and he puts the pills on the table, what does the camera do? The camera goes away. It like walks away and it looks somewhere else. It's very subtle. It's that you don't really even think about it, and then it comes back and then life goes on or whatever. For me, I wanted to lose all the baggage. I wanted all the baggage of it to be stripped away. And that's what science fiction allows you to do. I wanted to just look at sensations. I wanted worlds that felt like things. I wanted a synesthesia of emotion that got transported into clean lines and architecture and colors and so that the unsuspecting viewer, this is why it's very spoilery actually, the unsuspecting viewer could watch the whole movie not realizing that's a potential reading of what you could say the movie's about.
No, you're right, because a big difference from this and other movies about addiction is he's actually not actively in the movie that we're seeing pursuing that synthetic. It's something that Isabel introduces him to, and he doesn't come in touch with that particular iteration of a drug until Isabel's there, right? We just see him traditionally popping pills before then. So that was interesting as well. And something else I really want to commend you about, inclusion casting is really important these days to really expand our worldview in cinema and to level the playing field for everybody. And I thought it was interesting that Greg is coming from a multicultural family, and that you were able to have his wife clearly be African American, so that Emily and Arthur, his children, could be African American, even though we never see his wife. She's not in the film. Or now you're going to tell me, I'm sure, that she's somewhere in the background that I missed her. But like from what I saw, she wasn't in the film. So when did the idea of that come about for inclusion casting? Because again, you showed just how easy it is in your story and how non-distracting it is to do something like that. But it was just another really nice added touch.
Thanks. For me, I actually thought thematically, I was always inspired by, I have been very inspired by stories of people who are multi-ethnic or biracial, and particularly that sensation of being caught between two worlds in one's identity. I find there's a sort of a beautiful landscape that opens up to understand a different point of view. And that theme of being caught between two worlds really sort of reflected what Greg was going through, right? And it's different, obviously, but to have one foot in one world, one foot in another world. And I just felt like that resonated in an interesting way. And yes, it's inclusion casting, but it just felt it felt thematically in line. So that was very early on. That wasn't like that was just part of the.
That was in the screenplay.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if it wasn't. It wasn't in the screenplay.
Or maybe it just happened during your casting process when you realized that there's no reason he has to have white kids.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know.
Okay.
I feel like it was part of I think it was part of the script.
Okay.
But I'm not sure. It was definitely part of the casting. Like I was definitely seeking, I was like discovering all these people. And then we found Nesta, and Nesta, by the way, the thing that's so extraordinary about her. So I wasn't familiar with Nesta's work prior to, I was obviously familiar with Owen and Salma and like adored their work, but never saw them together. But for the role of Emily, I was meeting new people and seeing them read, do these lines. And when Nesta came in, I mean, I never had this experience. It was so thrilling. She did the scene that takes place above the riot with her father. And all of us sitting in the room just started weeping, literally, it was like, it's like the neon lights or whatever, the fluorescent lights. And her performance was so raw and powerful and beautiful. And I realized like that her role is very much the emotional spine of the movie. And to be able to pull that off, to give so much more than what's on the page, really, there was no one else who had that effect emotionally on me.
That's awesome. And it was a great aspect. Well, so, your films you put a lot of thought into them. So I actually sat down to decode something here about your oeuvre, as you're on your third film here. We've talked about this in the past, but I think it is a definite thematic for you, in which you seem to be drawn in your science fiction to the concept of second chances, because that is totally what Another Earth is about, right? This other Earth rolling around, Rhonda is going to get that second chance to make right on the damage that she has done. Origins with the reincarnation is definitely about the possibility of second chances and where it could lead. And, that's like the Pandora's box that opens, especially towards the end of the movie. And here it's about second chances, because even if you take the Plato's cave dark reality as fake, right, which Isabel insists it is throughout all of her scenes. And interestingly, his daughter never bothers saying what his other reality is. She's not commenting on it. She's not insisting that it's fake. But it is about second chances, because that's what your protagonist decides to go for. Like, even if he doesn't really have a daughter, and she's a GFP, right? FGP. Yeah, fake generated person. And so she's a fake generated person. And at one point we see her image on one of the computer screens, next to the brain box in the Utopia when he comes out of it. He still goes for that as humans are drawn towards getting that redemption and that second chance. What attracts you now that you've had 3 films that keep falling into that zone? What do you think attracts you to the thematic of second chances as a way of redemption?
It moves me. It like sincerely forgiveness moves me. The grace moves me. The forgiveness, Rhoda's story in Another Earth, the whole theme is forgiveness. Is second chances, yes, but second chances, you can only arrive at a second chance if someone opens that door for you. If that door is allowed to exist. And I find that somehow it moves me really deeply when somebody gives that to somebody else. It's funny, it's like the first thing about it's such a small, simple thing. But I remember being in a taxi cab in the city, and we crashed into some other car. Like 2 cars got into a crash, right? And it's such a subtle thing, but the one guy got out and looked at his car, and our cab driver got out and looked at the car, and there was just sort of like, don't worry about it. This sense of like, you're let off the hook, like, don't sweat it. And that's the simplest version. But what happens when you take it to the extreme extreme version. In the case of Rhoda, in the case of, I guess I Origins, like what it's an idea about second chances, not so much forgiveness, but and then in terms of Bliss, like it's this daughter's feeling towards her father is this unconditional acceptance, even though it's brutal and it's harsh. Like she's, and the reason the brother exists is to show the counterpoint, right? It's not a given that the child will necessarily forgive the parent. And so that was important to see that contrast. Like one just couldn't arrive at it and one does arrive at it. And I find that really, it shakes my spine. Like when I see that, it moves me, and I think it's beautiful.
That's great.
Examples of it are beautiful. It's funny. The work reveals itself to you too. Like it's not like I chase it particularly, but themes do emerge when you keep continually make work. You start realize you learn about yourself and what qualities you find in other people that are really, really compelling. And that's one I really value.
I was thinking long and hard about it, and I was noticing that is like the common denominator between these three films. You know, talking for a second about your experience with effects and what you were talking about the roller rink scene. There is so much going on in the roller rink scene. It's like a video game. They're using their powers because they're on the yellow crystals, and I mean, you're having like a light fall into a skater's head that they're making because they're just like having fun with it. But the brilliance of that scene though is, and I want to hear about the effects for a second because you got into that a second ago, but there's so much going on. They're having sex in the bathroom, as classy people do, at a roller rink. And, by the end of the scene, the police are called and they grab stuff off the shelf, new clothes. They walk out in the new clothes, something that we see them do again later in the Utopia. There's a shoebox and coat hangers and stuff like that. So you're repeating it. But they walk outside and they're laughing it off and they see the cop cars in the background. And there's this really weird moment where they see themselves being arrested. And then the POV shifts from them to the car. And then they're looking outside at the people that were dressed like them, but are definitely actually not them. It's not a doppelganger moment. They're seeing people outside that are completely different actors in those same clothes. And you're realizing that like even their own view of reality and their powers could, in a sense, be false. And so there's a lot going on there. Talk about that kicker to the scene of like, it's all fun and games. And then suddenly they're looking out from the cop car and you're realizing maybe, there's a chance they don't have these powers and they're just two people on drugs having sex in a bathroom. So there's so many different ways to interpret it. And I like that you left it open, but talk about constructing that scene.
I really, really appreciate you pointing out that scene. That's an unusual scene. And it's also it's sometimes kind of difficult to explain, but I guess the best way to, the way I think about it is this: we've watched 120 years of cinema, and cinema as an art form, it's like it has a syntax, and there's a syntax that we understand, going from wide shot to close-up shot to super close-up, and it's in some way, or shot, reverse shot. It's amazing. It's almost like sentences, like we're constructing sentences, or the most deft and brilliant filmmakers are really great at syntax. You realize like that's part of it. Like they know how to, like the directors, right? Outside of writing, like the director really does construct shot by shot structure for a scene. And we somehow, it's like such a dream language in a weird way. Somehow we completely seamlessly can interpret shot, reverse shot, wide shot, close up, this and that. We understand if they see an object, like the whole idea of the birth of montage. And so we're at an era now where we're like pretty deep into it, and viewers are very sophisticated. Like our understanding of syntax, it's like as if it were a poem. We've been reading thousands and thousands of poems, and we know, we know what, how if you put this word here and this word here and this has an ambiguous, like it does this.
Well, there is a visual language. I mean, that's what you're talking about, visual language.
It's a visual language, and look at different filmmakers. We were talking about Contagion. Like if you look at the end of Contagion, there's the final little like sequence. There's the trucks that knock down the tree, the bats that fly away, the bat that eats the thing, that drops the thing, drops a banana and the pig eats it, whatever. It's a series of shots that don't have words, but suddenly you understand you understand a very tight narrative. Or like if you look at the Coen brothers, they're masters of syntax. They're like, they can be very tight with their structure of a sentence, of a scene sentence, and they don't even have to give you the car crash and you know what happened, right? They can like so anyways, long story long. I wanted to play with syntax, which is and particularly POV syntax, and how, like, we understand that if a person looks and then you cut to something, you're seeing what they're looking at, right? That's a very simple subject verb phraseology or whatever. And in the pursuit of making a story where we are 100% with the protagonist at all times, right? So this is what we were talking about earlier. That's why I don't like to be so explicit. My goal is to make you, audience person sitting here, and protagonist, to like kind of like line up and see the world together. And so what he experiences, you should be experiencing. So if he experiences disorientation, you should be experiencing disorientation. And particularly like, so and if he's feeling,
you're still talking about the roller skating scene at the end of it.
Yes. And so when he, if you think about the syntax of the history of cinema in terms of hallucination sequences, how does it work? There's some sort of object or some sort of trigger thing that sets you off onto a hallucination, and then you come back to reality, and that was all just imagined, right? And and we know what that we know what that looks like. You imagine a character looks at a painting, and then suddenly the painting is all around, and they're in the painting, and then they're back sitting at their desk, right? What that does is that's a pathway where you and the audience separate for a bit and then come back together. So the trigger point typically in this syntax is placed early in the sentence. I wanted to put the trigger point at the end, because that's how he experienced it. He doesn't realize this is not happening as it's happening. It is happening, right? Or that disorientation and that sort of having to retrace the steps of what happened and not be able to parse it out is what he's experiencing. That is his experience of it. And so how do you represent that in film? Clearly, but how do you represent disorientation clearly? And then also, this is like, I don't know if this is interesting to you, but for financial reasons or for just technical, like whatever, logistical reasons, it was a lot easier to shoot him in a police car that was not moving. Like we didn't have rights to use the road, right? Or we were running out of time to use the road. But it was so vital to me that the cop car was moving, because I wanted him to see these other homeless people on the street. I wanted to do.
So did you just move the camera? Did you just move the camera to fake it?
No, we figured it out. We got the street. We shot it earlier when we still owned the street. That was great. That one. But the point is, I wanted him to see it and then for it to keep going, because life just keeps going. You don't get to pause and analyze what happened in life. You have to just keep moving on. And so that's why it keeps going on. So that the strange syntax is a way to thwart the trope of hallucinations in cinema and to keep you close together with the protagonist's experience of what he's feeling, which is disorientation, and then having to reassess what happened, but not having enough time to process it. And that's what it looks like.
And of course, that walks right into my next question about visual language. It's interesting because it is first person subjective with your protagonist, but you do cut away to Isabel when she goes to visit Keto. And and so interestingly, there is a cutaway, which and the same actually for Emily, his daughter, and Arthur. So you could argue that these two other people vying to convince him that their reality is real are living their own separate lives. And it's up to us, the audience, to decide whether those separate lives are part of a simulation or a real world.
Absolutely. So, that's vital. That was vital, actually. Oddly enough, the Kendo and Isabel scene where it breaks his POV, he's on the street, right? And we go inside there. what that does, why do we have that scene? Why don't we cut it out? It actually earns us something. It earns a credibility to the bliss world, right? Right. So we need to infuse the bliss world with credibility. The brain box has to seem reasonable. The world has to seem three-dimensional and rich and historic. And at the end of the scene with Kendo, he says, "Is he real?" Right. And so all of a sudden, Kendo is speaking the same language as Isabel. So Kendo is a believer, right? Kendo is from that world. And what that does is for us, it earns us a few more points on the camp of the bliss world's reality, right? And we need that to understand where Greg is. So in a strange way, we need it to be with Greg, to not separate with him. I need us to stay, even though we literally break first person subjective. We maintain. It earns us that emotion later to have the balance be equal.
Right, because Emily and her brother are balancing it on their own as well. So
exactly,
I mean, it works, and it also goes back to what's explained at the dinner party in the bliss world of the universe is balanced on a turtle, and what's under the turtle, another turtle, and what's under that turtle, another turtle. So I mean, like, that concept is prevalent all throughout. So I thought that was really interesting. I'm curious about the idea for the brain box, because it had a cool look. When did that idea come about? And I absolutely love the red noodle that's just slipping back up into his nose as he takes off his nose mask in the bliss world.
I wanted it to be an organic computer, or like the idea of like, what could instead of having some visual effect of like glowing blue or whatever, I wanted it to have like a tree full of brains. And we do this thing throughout the film. You've already picked up on it, which is that we do compositional deja vu. We have different sets that have the same layouts and shapes, like the tent home and the farmer's market. We have, or the statues and the statues, or
the roller skating coat rack and shoe thing, and the same one at the brain box facility.
Precisely. And so it's an unusual thing to do. And it takes a lot of effort to do that, and huge kudos to Cass, our production designer, for figuring out all the details, and our camera movement has to align exactly. And so the brain box and the tree are our most expensive production design elements. The tree is built. We built that out of steel. It's like actually a fake tree.
Wow.
That we designed it and molded it and fabricated the whole thing. And it's surrounded by these chairs that are like old car chairs or whatever. And you only catch it sort of towards the end when they eject. But there's this compositional repeat where you feel that the brain box, this brain tree, and the tree of Isabel's tarp home are actually one and of the same. And what that does for me is it reveals something about how we see, and how we subscribe to we hold on to our beliefs, and we use every little piece of information as evidence for our beliefs, even if it's not, but yet you could use the same evidence on the flip side. So when you see the tree, or you see the statues, or you see the farmer's market, you think, if you believe the ugly world is the real world, then you think that these images that you're seeing in the bliss world are just sort of shiny versions of it, rose-colored glasses versions of their actually ugly reality. But you could easily, if you believe the bliss world is real, you could easily do the reverse, which is that they're constructing like ugly versions or broken versions of these things that exist in the real world, because that's how the brain box works. That's how you're placing these things there because they're actually referenced from the real world. So you can use them as evidence for your side. So the idea of the brain box was what makes it feel legitimate, that you can organically connect to something that's a brain, and that's what would a simulation of the 20 years in the future look like, or 10 years in the future look like? Well, maybe it's built with brains, and you actually have to stick a neuron cable in your nose, and somehow it connects in there.
And I love that.
But we're working on several different layers, basically.
Yeah, and I just love the thing that's also slipping up his nose, whatever the heck that was. It was part of something in the organic process.
The spaghetti worm.
Yes, the spaghetti worm. There's a lot going on in the movie, and it's at a certain point, if you keep your audience as far in the wind as your protagonist, for some people, it's hard to watch. And so you have a grounding moment, and usually that moment is through exposition. And one of the cliches of science fiction is the introduction of a character named Dr. Exposition, as we've come to call those characters. But obviously, Jurassic Park got around that by doing the little animated movie. And here you have your exposition, a lot of it coming through the thought visualizer, where you're explaining in the Bliss world that everybody in this world, it went through some really bad times. And then through asteroid mining, everybody's getting $500,000 a year salaries and the world's better. But calling back even to that concept in the Matrix of, they said the first version of the Matrix was a utopia and the human batteries didn't last as long. So they needed to give them pain and suffering to keep it going and to get more out of the humans, because humans are drawn to that. Talk about coming up with the concept of the thought visualizer and that broadcasting of exposition through it at that point in the movie, because it was important and it was interesting, and again is giving a verification of what the Bliss world might be. But it was a good way to get it across without using a Dr. Exposition character.
It's the trick to it, or the reason, it's all emotionally based. So that's actually, if you track the thought visualizer, it occurs 2 times. That's the 3rd time it comes. Actually, there's a 4th time that's hidden in the background. But the 2 explicit versions are when Greg is talking to his daughter on the phone in the office. He says, "I have so many thoughts. I wish you could see them." Right. And it's about expressing one's a point, like getting you to understand where you're coming from. Right. And so that's an emotional yearning he's having. Right. And then again, when he meets Emily on the street, he says, "I have so many thoughts." And then it's the only part in the movie where we have voiceover continue his sentence. And he says, "I wish you could see," even though he's not saying it with his voice. And then if you think about the Bliss world, this is very meta, but if you think about the Bliss world, just the way it's represented is a grand version of the thought visualizer. It is a representation of your emotional internal, like it is the expression of the inside outside. And so it felt like, in a weird sort of, drop a germ in a petri dish and watch it grow into a crystal. Like it felt like the crystal that birthed out of that emotion. The thought visualizer is the thing that he's emotionally chasing. He wants to be able to speak and be understood because he's having a hard time conveying what he's feeling. And the movie is a version of that in general. It is like, what is bliss? Okay. Like, what is this bliss feeling? It's walking on this beautiful promenade and catching a peach and biting into it. That's what it is. It's the thought visualizer. And so the thought visualizer is an actual literalization of that emotional thing. And it serves as a fun way to say, this is what our utopia is, and again, it's a little bit fun, but its core is deeply emotional.
I thought it was cool. And I mean, the one thing that I was curious about was at once or twice they mentioned, "Oh, have you tried saying we're in a pickle?" to the thought visualizer and seeing what happens. And I don't remember seeing what happens when that happens. Was that something that you were planning to show, or was it just kind of like a side note? Just like,
no. It was in the script that you couldn't see it, right? That was supposed to be a little bit. Okay. The idea is like you can't, I don't even know if it translates, but basically, again, I like to do things in 3s, right? So they say it. They say, she's like, "Oh, let's do my favorite. Say you're in a pickle. We're in a pickle." And then you just see their reaction, right? So it's like it's restraint. Like it's always nice to hold something back and leave it in the audience's imagination. So I wanted to, it was absolutely scripted. Do not show the screen when they say this, right? And so, and then it comes up again when Bill Nye says, he's like, "Oh, I got one of those thought visualizers. You have to say, are you in a pickle?" Like, "I'm in a pickle. Try it sometime." And then it becomes like we're building an inside joke in the movie. And then finally the climactic moment when it's very stressful, they're surrounded by the police and it's very, there's not really any way out. A moment of levity arrives when she says, "We're in a pickle," and he's like, "We're in a pickle." And so it's a callback to that.
And I loved seeing Bill Nye in the movie. He was great. Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you about Backstory Magazine. You know, we just published issue 42. There are so many cool things in it, and you can check it all out over at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop or through our iPad app. And, you know, I'm really proud of what we did. You can see the table of contents. We're one of the only magazines in the world that publishes screenplays in their entirety, along with interviews by noted writers. And you know, we have great stuff that you cannot find anywhere else in the world. Like Simon Kinberg, he gave us his first screenplay to publish in there, along with an interview about what it was like for him as a young writer to sell his first screenplay. And then Joe Carnahan wrote a script with his brother Matthew Michael Carnahan that we also published, along with an interview with Joe about LA 58, which is a movie that he still hopes to be able to make. So, and by the way, it's an incredible movie. It's an incredible script. He gave us some storyboards as well. So that is, you can only see that in Backstory Magazine. We also, of course, have TV interviews, film interviews, comic book writer interviews, a lot of really fascinating stuff. So I hope you check us out. You could read our free issue over at backstory.net or through the iPad app. And again, you could save $5 by using coupon code SAVE5 if you want to subscribe to us. So thanks so much for checking out Backstory Magazine. But now, without any further ado, we're going to jump right back into our conversation about Amazon Studios' new film, Bliss, with writer-director Mike Cahill. What would you say is the rule of the kind of transference of characters between worlds? Because, you know, I know that the blue crystals get them out of the dark cave world, and they never have enough, so they think their transference is bad. When they're in the bliss world, it's referred to not as a crystal, but as a blue algorithm. And so that was interesting. But then you see these ghost people, like hallucinations of sorts, in the bliss world that you assume are from the darker world bleeding over. And that comes as part of your climax. So I'm curious what you want to tell us about that kind of bleeding over between these two worlds, and what you think the rule is as to how the riot and the police invades the bliss world, you know, nice ceremony at the end.
Well, I think you just said it. I mean, your reading is exactly that's exactly what I feel about it, which is that, you know, these things, it's like, what do you see? When you walk down the street, there are certain things you see and certain things that you don't see, and they are completely ideologically programmed. And two people walking down the street are going to see different things, right? It's like one of the oldest ways of understanding what perception even is. Like, we are not perceiving everything that there is to be perceived, and everybody has a slightly different version of those perceptions. And
like Rashomon, basically.
Yeah, like Rashomon is a masterpiece of it, and this is also why I really wanted Slavoj Žižek in the film. He has like a small appearance at the end, because he's like the guy who's all the film philosopher who's all about ideology, which is like a little fun Easter egg in there. But for me, again, just like the thought visualizer is a literalization of an emotion. The whole movie, I try to literalize emotional things. It's like turning an emotion into an object. It's turning it, making it expressing it in a visual way where you're actually seeing it and contending with that. So think about the holographic people. It feels like it's a technology thing, right? Telepresence, it's all the rage these days. But really it's the people who you're not seeing entirely. It's the forgotten ones, the ones who, when you drive through LA and you're not seeing the tent villages because you're blind to it, but it's everywhere, you know, and or people who are suffering, or people who are having a hard time, or people, loved ones that you're not seeing. We literalize that by making them half visible, and we lay the seeds to make it feel like everything has to have a bistability of interpretations. That's how the movie works. The movie is not a didactic piece. It's a framework where we can walk away with it. It's a framework to allow you to put those emotions or your reading into it. It's a relationship between you and the audience. And so I need the biostability of interpretations to exist. Those holograms are telepresence. It's futuristic technology, but they're also the people we're not seeing. We're half seeing it, and it becomes climactic when Emily shows up as a hologram. And then
because the telepresence is for people in bliss, like, oh, she couldn't, you know, the wife that they're talking to, she couldn't make it, so she's telepresence. Okay, fine. But Emily and the rioting cops and the way you're seeing your scenery itself, your sets are changing just based on the graffiti on the wall or not on the wall. talk about the rule for that breakdown of the two realities. I mean, do you see that as something more happening in Greg's mind per se? And that's what's going on, is the two realities are battling in his mind?
Yeah, they're battling in his mind and in Isabel's mind. So like you can justify. So again, with maybe it's so hard to explain these things. Like usually the movie is the best version of explaining.
Of course.
But the idea is that you can explain that in two ways, right? One, they didn't take enough blue crystals. And so some part of that, that little wormy thing that you talked about, that's not a mistake. That's the simulation going up into his nose. That sets a seed for us to understand, oh, wait a second. Some part of that brain box is still, it like weaseled its way up his nose. And now there's like a little worm, there's a brain box worm in his head. And that probably wouldn't have happened if they took enough blue crystals, right? So here's all this justification. The reading is Bliss World is real. Here's the problem. We didn't take enough blue crystals. We didn't take enough of the algorithm to eject properly. We even visually saw the worm go up his nose. And now these rioters and the trash and the graffiti and Emily and everything showing up from the ugly world simulation is a result of this mistake, our mistake of trying to eject without enough. We needed 10, we took 8. Shit, we made a compromise where we shouldn't have compromised. And so you can make that complete justification. You can also say it's wearing off and they're coming back to reality of the ugly world, right? And so that's another reading that it's fading, like the thing there, like Emily's version of reality, that he's experiencing some sort of addiction. It's like the buzz is fading away and reality is coming back in. And what do they need to do? They need to score more. And so both of those things simultaneously are allowed to have their integrity.
And that's great. That's a great explanation for it. One of the things I'm curious about is the relationship.
We're going deep into it. It's like
we're deep into it, and I love it, man, because like there's a lot of layers to this film. But for Isabel, it's interesting. She repeatedly says that they're soulmates. And just the way that Emily says that she's his daughter, right? And he has to just decide to interpret that. But we know that, like, at least in the cave world, that obviously his children are biracial and they're of African American descent, and that's definitely not Isabel. So what do you think Isabel was doing to make her case that they really were soulmates? Because I mean, in the Bliss world, you see the connection for sure. And you see this interesting, interview in front of an audience that is played against a previous interview, kind of a before and after, which I thought was an amazing scene. Tell us some of the things that you planted in there of the connection with Isabel as his soulmate. Because again, it's confusing when she gets into a car, possibly as a hooker, in the hooker zone, and leaves them at one point.
Gosh, it's weird. You're one of the first people I've actually spoken such in depth with about this film. This is our first interview for and so as you're speaking, I realized how strange of a movie it is. It is a very, very strange
but beautiful,
strange movie. But I'll tell you this is a huge credit to Salma. Salma is she's an extraordinary talent, and the scene and and I'll point out something. One of my favorite moments in the film, and it's a very subtle thing, but it speaks volumes both to her talent and why she's so brilliant as a performer and as an artist. And it also serves that line of questioning you have about soulmates. It's in the presentation where Greg is seated there and she's showing the pre-brain box interview Greg, where he's like, can I be petty for a second? The fucking pool temperature is too cold. Like, how hard is it to get a fucking pool to be, not joining the polar bear club? And he's so good. He's like so strong, and that's like he's like leading into some of he's extraordinary. And if you watch Isabel, if you watch Salma, in that moment she looks off. There's a moment where she looks off. She doesn't look at him or at the screen. She looks off into her memory, and she delivers this entire backstory that gave me chills, because like she's doing all this work to the script in performance. You realize what brilliant actors are and what they do and what they're capable of. In that look, she tells us in such a succinct way that this brain box was created because she had to save her marriage. She had a relationship with a guy who was taking her for granted, and she was remembering as she was reliving that moment of the belittlement of the fucking this and okay, Dr. Clemens and all this, and it's so tightly drawn that you without having to show anything, you get you believe the Bliss world more, right? You believe that the Bliss world has a history. You believe that she has an emotional motivation for even pursuing this science, this creation, creating an ugly world simulation in the first place, because she's trying to generate gratitude in a husband who's starting to take things for granted. And that's when all the pieces of script, performance, cinematography, editing, all the pieces of cinema comes together, and you go into a close-up and a performer can give you that. You believe they're soulmates. You believe they're soulmates, but you also believe that they're a relationship that's struggling, that's trying to find its way back to the soulmate status.
And that's all Plato's Cave as well, because he says he doesn't care, he loves this world, and being in the cave world has given him a new appreciation for the Bliss world, whether, regardless of whether it's real or not is left up to the audience, which I thought was fascinating. I absolutely love the story about hell that's told at the dinner party. I'm curious where that came from, because the basis of it is hell's supposed to be this terrible place, but they're actually all doing okay. But they say, you know what? On the day, somebody that an angel comes to observe us, we might as well pretend that it looks bad so they don't take it away from us. I love that story. And I'm just curious where that came from in your process, because it was a cool, again, comparison of these two different worlds.
So that's I'm so glad you pointed out that. I love that moment. That's a very special moment for me. That is completely improvised. That's really, so that person who's doing that is Slavoj Žižek, who's this wonderful, I don't know if you've ever seen the Pervert's Guide to Cinema, these documentaries. You can look them up. They're wonderful. He analyzes the ideology embedded in cinema, and he's like a modern philosopher of cinema. And I reached out to him and asked him if he could, because I wanted to make the Bliss World party feel like it's like a meeting place of scientists and artists. What is my Bliss World is a world where science and art are held to the highest regards, and those are the things, the wonder fields in some ways is what everyone's pursuing. And there's this Pleiades hotel, which is Pleiades stars, which is also play at ease, and everybody's having a nice time. It's all sort of lovely. And I was trying to figure out who populates this. And this is where we have Bill Nye, and he's very charismatic. And then we have Slavoj Žižek. And so I told Slavoj the story of the film, and he lives in Slovenia, and I was I kind of want to make you a hologram at a party, and you could say anything you want. Basically, I originally scripted a thing about the red pill, blue pill of the Matrix.
Right.
And he was saying, because he famously, he does a piece about how there's the red pill, there's the blue pill, and everyone thinks there's only two choices, but actually there's four choices. There's the red pill, the blue pill, no pills, or both pills. And which is just a sort of a fun play on choice.
Yeah.
And, you forget there's more than two choices. And so I was you said that in a movie, and I really liked it, and it kind of fits with our movie, but you could say anything you want. So I just put him in front of green screens, and he talked for 2-3 hours or something like that. And I asked him, I was pretending to be Salma, and I was giving him a hard time about this and that. And then he was just riffing. But out of all the material, I found that really thematically aligned with the story we were telling, because we go from chasing some sort of paradise to embracing the hell and finding pleasure and joy in it.
Yeah, I love that. That's wild to find out that it was an improv. Editing's the last stage of storytelling. What did you learn about Bliss in the editing room? What were some of the scenes that were cut that people might be interested in hearing about that would end up on a Blu-ray or something like that? And what were the lessons in cutting those scenes?
I spoke about the other one, which was like moving the thing earlier. The editing process, I got lost in the editing process, to be honest.
How long was it? Sorry to interrupt. How long was your editing process?
Well, there's sort of like a standard thing where you have to show it to the studio, which is like the DGA standard. I don't remember. I think it's like 10 weeks, if I remember correctly. But then, and then you work on it for a while, and then COVID happened, and we weren't actually finished with everything, and we shut down. And in a strange way, we stopped the edit, and I didn't watch the movie for maybe it might have even been 2 months. I took a break. I was like, I'm not going to watch it anymore, and I'm going to come back with fresh eyes.
That's rare.
And it's so rare. And what a gift it was. It was such a beautiful gift. So I came back and I watched it. And what was really amazing is I felt separate from myself. Like I felt like I could criticize myself very, very honestly. And I was like, dude, I know what you're trying to do with this scene. This is how you have to do it. Like talking to myself, and like I felt like Neo in the Matrix. Like I felt exactly, I could see through the whole piece. And I saw there were things I cut out early on in the edit that I put back in. There were things that were too long, things that were too short. Every single scene I had like it was just a thing I never experienced, which is time away from it and then coming back to it with a fresh eye, because I could be as critical as I wanted to. Who am I going to offend? It's myself. And
so tell us about some of those tough cuts. What were some of the things you realized when you came back to it?
Well, they're not big. They're small.
No? Okay. So there's no big missing scenes or anything like that?
No, not really. No, it's pretty, it's pretty faithful to I'll tell you this. There was the biggest cut, the hugest cut was, it's funny, I practically forgot about it now, but the movie originally opened on this wide shot of the city. And a very complicated thing to do because we had it on a drone shot. So it started on this wide shot and then it flies forward and then it turns towards the building and it flies through the window. And there's a scene where Bjorn and Doris are talking about Greg. So it starts not in the protagonist's point of view. And it starts with the boss and the secretary sort of talking shit about him, and then the camera flies past them into the bullpen, and then there's Josh Leonard's character, another character talking shit about Greg, and then it flies up to his door, and then we cut to the inside, and he's drawing the pictures. So it started like basically I was setting up and that was in the script, and it was very complicated to do, and it created I wanted to put in this tonal thing which made us doubt the reality of the world, but it just tipped the scales a little too far into falseness. Like once you start flying through windows, right? That's an aesthetic choice. You fly through a window, you're in a controlled, curated aesthetic, right? You're not handheld. You're like, you're doing a little bit of Citizen Kane, but it's like,
right.
You're doing like you're flying through a window is a choice. When you make that, you're in a video game or you're in a simulation.
Special effects and stuff like that too.
Precisely. And so it creates, I initially thought that was good. And I thought that was good for a very long time. And then when I was watching it, because I thought like, oh, this is, I want a big, beautiful, cool opening. But then I realized, no, I should just start with the main character and his emotion. Let's start small. Because we still go into that shot out. Before we go in and then we pulled out. But now after Bjorn gets killed and he leaves, we do this long Steadicam shot where he walks through the bullpen, gets in the elevator, and then it pulls through, and then it passes, and then you see it reveals Bjorn like squished up against the window, and then it reveals the big wide city shot. And then I thought, like, well, why am I doing this twice? Let's just do it once, because then it's an escalation as opposed to an escalation down to the small, down to big.
Yeah.
But for some reason, it was very hard for me to let that go. I was holding on to it because I so knew how hard it was, that it was so hard for us to achieve. Our drone broke twice. We had to shoot over several days. All these things went wrong. And I was so glad that we got it. And then I just cut it ultimately.
That's a hell of a cut. It's interesting because so many people think of the Hitchcockian method for shooting, right? Which I think is sound. in which you plan your stuff out once you're happy with your script and you stick to the plan, right? Hitchcock would notoriously sleep on his own sets because if things were going to the plan that he had, there weren't many surprises. It was fascinating to hear that you were rewriting during production, because that gets some filmmakers actually in really big trouble, not with their producers, but with their own narrative, because, self-doubt is the enemy of any artist. And it could sometimes lead to really bad things, but it could also sometimes, when you keep kicking the tires on your story, could lead to improvements. What were some of the things that you felt were not ready to go, that you needed to change during production as you were rewriting, as you said, that you could explain to us as like, yeah, this was a positive change. If I didn't rewrite it, it would have been in this old bad version that I didn't like.
One of the big ones was the climax. And by the way, when you have a 25-day schedule or whatever, you don't have a lot of wiggle room to write it on the day. Like, you got, like, rewriting means, like, I was rewriting while we were prepping, not rewriting that much, but once I started rehearsing with Owen and Salma, we tweak things. Like, their input was massive. It was like they just had more succinct ways. Sometimes I write too much. Like, I'll write like 14 sentences that could be turned into 2, and they're like, oh, I can do a look that says all this or whatever. And like it's a beautiful experience to actually have. But the one scene that we changed while we were shooting it, and it was because it wasn't landing, actually, it was that climax. I wrote too much. And we did all the words. There was I just wrote too much. I don't know. I wrote way too much. We shot it, and we didn't have time anymore to come back to it. We had to shoot this other complex scene because we had that tarp home only for a certain period. And we went and we had lunch, and I was like, I was sitting through lunch, and I was like, oh, I can't let my climax go. Like, I can't. It has to break through. We had to get to the other side emotionally, and we were right there at the edge of it, but we didn't burst through it. And so then I asked the producers and the line producer and Owen and Salma, I was like, can we just go back and do the scene, but like take away all the words, like just actually strip here, we'll just get rid of this, just say those things by looking at each other, like say more by saying less. And
you're talking about at the tent with the police and everything, right? Yeah,
at the tent with the police. Yeah, because that's a very, very tricky airplane to land. Because she has to say, so this is what it ended up being. She says, this is horrible. This is a nightmare. This is me. And then she starts banging her head against the desk. And that bang of the head is a certain sort of like physical hurting of herself almost, but it's subtle. She's like hitting her head, and he looks at her, and it dawns upon him that this is horrible. This is a nightmare. This is me. She's talking about the simulation. She's talking about this world. She's talking about her spirit. She's talking about who she is. She's chaos. She is the mess. She is the nightmare. And he has grown to love her deeply. And so he watches her say that, and we just give it air, and we see her hitting the thing, and he says, but there's something kind of beautiful about it. And that's the turn, right? It just went, and they both like nail it. And she looks at him like incredulously, and he's like, no, but there is and then he goes on this run, and he's so good at these runs. He's like, and he improvs it. He's like, the police coming and us running, and you don't know what's going to happen, and this and that. And he's like, there's something so he's like, I fucking love it here, and I'm staying. And so he's now saying he loves her. And it's through her that he's come to love here. And the reward from that, right at that moment that thing's landing, is you hear, Dad, scream. And it's like chilling, right? And so then the daughter screams. And so it's like, that was very hard to pull off. We tried one thing, we rewrote it with less, but more precise. And then in the edit, we just wiggled it to land perfectly. And I was very proud of it. But so that one, and you can mess up a lot of things and nobody will notice. But if you mess up the place where the whole thing's got to land on a dime, like the movie doesn't work, right?
No, I could see that. That's great that you realize less is more, because I mean, it is an impactful moment. And then the tracking shot you do when he's escaping from that area. Good God, man. Like, how many times did you do that shot? Because that was a long shot, but it wasn't so much the time of it. It was the distance that he covers during it.
Yeah, that was a huge challenge too, because I wanted it to be a continuous moving shot. I wanted it to be at magic hour. I wanted to see the whole sites of the movie. We passed by all the places, and we again, with a tight schedule, we were, if you're shooting at magic hour, you're trying to get this very complex shot that requires a steady cam operator running who jumps on a truck. The truck has to drive him. There's all these different complexities to it. We have eye lights like very carefully held. We have focus in a follow van. So the orchestration, we choreographed it a bunch of times, but you only have you only get two shots, two chances. Really? And we did it twice, and we kind of didn't perfectly land the technological. We did decently. And by the way, from a performance standpoint, like it's not just one long run. There's actually 3 sections emotionally, which is the first, I think of it as 3 acts. Like there's the escape, survivalist escape is the first chunk. The second chunk is the grief and like experiencing grief of the loss of this person. And the third chunk is like the commitment to make a decision to go where he goes, which is to the safe harbor. And so those are wordless but performance things that Owen so brilliantly does. Like he crushes that. And it's also, there's a physicality to the whole thing, which is, he's very fit. He has to run up this huge hill while we're all sitting on a car driving and he's running it. But so we did it twice and it wasn't perfect. And because our light flipped on and then we corrupted our shot, our follow car drove through it. And I was like falling on the floor because when you have like 3.5 minutes of it perfect, it was soul crushing. But we were just fortunate that we were going to be at the location for one more day. And that was the moment where I was like, please, let's pull whatever secret lever we can to like be allowed to shoot, to get one more go at sunset at this. And so the next day we came back and we shot it 2 more times and we nailed it.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And everybody was so grateful. Like we had such a great team, like Steadicam, everybody, our whole like technical team who carried it out. They rose above and beyond the challenge, and they were like, "We're so glad we got to do this the second time because then we could all like land it." But it was awesome.
That's awesome. What was your toughest scene? What was your toughest scene on the page? The scene you kept coming back to over and over as a writer that you were nervous about, and how did you creatively crack it? And what was your toughest scene as a director?
Well, definitely the climax I just spoke of. Like that.
Okay. That was your toughest scene on the page.
Yeah. Okay. That's the one I probably rewrote the most.
That makes sense.
I rewrote it. I overwrote it. I was trying because it's a puzzle, right? You really have to. It can't just simply be he stays because of his daughter, right?
Right.
That has to be part of it. That has to be a component of it. But otherwise, well, why does Isabel's character exist? Like there has to be a change that comes through drama. There has to be something that comes from this experience of time with her. And obviously I've now said it 500 million times, but the change is to fall in love with the chaos, to appreciate it. After you bite into that apple and the whole world becomes like, you delight in the relish of the flesh or whatever the expression is. Like there's something about, like he has to decide he loves the place through Isabel. He has to love the simulated world, whether it's a simulation or not, doesn't matter. That actually doesn't really matter. You are where you are. Emily says, you're not late, you're here, which is everything. It's like, you're here. That's the whole point. And so you're choosing to be in a certain place, and he has to love here through her, through Isabel. And that's how the experience of Emily is allowed to sort of be appreciated for all of the richness that it is. So that was definitely the hardest, directing and writing.
So for both. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
Roller disco was hard, of course. Everyone wanted me to cut the roller disco, by the way.
Wait, really?
Not cut it, but this is one of those things that let me shut this off. The roller disco structurally.
I guess it would soak up your budget a little because there's so much going on where you have so many stunts. Why else would they want you to cut the roller disco?
No, it was there. It's so interesting. It came up a bunch. So the roller disco seems like it's just all fun and games and the two people having a great time or whatever, but it actually has a very important shape to it. There's all these vignettes, and the vignettes actually have a writerly structure to them. There's a change that happens to Owen's character throughout that scene, which is very, very important. And I guess I was having a hard time articulating it because it wasn't to cut the scene, but I got a lot of notes that was like, maybe you shouldn't have the part where he knocks down the elderly people.
Right. Because there's a woman on the walker there. And I was curious what the significance was of that.
Yeah. Okay. So here's what it is. Because like, I think it gives people a little bit of the willies because it's like, it's okay. So here's what's going on. This scene is all about Greg working his way over to a new paradigm, which says, I have no moral investment in this reality. It's about the separation between him and a moral investment in here and now. And because, so the first one is they're just skating. The first vignette is they're skating along and some guy bumps in and breaks them up and comes through them. And so what that represents in a way is like an attack against them. And he takes the guy down with the special yellow crystal powers, and boom, the guy hits the ground. So it's a retaliation for an attack, and it's justified. We can understand that point of view. That's justified.
Sure. And then the second one is justified, where the guy's grabbing the girl's butt. So he's a misogynist. They knock him to the ground. And then they just kind of go crazy and they start knocking everyone to the ground. And you have this great shot of everybody on the ground and them kissing, which is like a hero shot. But before that, right, the old people. So tell us, right. what is the significance there?
Yeah, so the second one is an injustice against somebody else. Like this boy hits this girl's butt and Salomon's character takes him down, right? Totally justified. But then the third one is this elderly woman looks judgmentally at Isabel. And she shakes her head, and it's like, look, like there's like a sort of just a heavy judgment. And Isabel says, "Take her down," and he says, "No." Like that's like a bridge too far for him, right? He won't go. That's too far because he still kind of has one toe in his investment here. And she says she's not real, and he's like, "No, I can't do it." And this is all playing out sort of while the music's playing. It's all sort of fun. And then he's like, "All right, fuck it," and he takes her down. And then for good measure, he takes the elderly man standing next to him down too. And if we can get the audience to cross that bridge with him, right? Because that's not an easy bridge to cross. That's a terrible thing to do. But if we laugh a little bit when he does that and we feel their reaction, and then of course it's all bets are off at the end. He's like making everybody fall down and he's making the lights smash that girl's. Everything's terrible at that point. It's all immoral, horrible. But if we suddenly it turns into like a Grand Theft Auto where they're just, the fake generated people are very much that. Like you don't have to worry about them. They're not real people. And so he has to cross that bridge, and we have to cross that bridge with him, because later the conflict is going to be the elderly woman was nothing. Your daughter's not real. So now what? Like now how are you going to handle that? And so I, like everybody was like, oh, just keep the first one, the second one, lose the elderly one and all the other crazy ones and that'll work. And I was like, no, it won't work. We have to, I know it's delicate, but we have to cross that bridge with them. Otherwise everything falls apart.
Well, and you're right, because part of his arc is getting back to, as you said, the other side, in which, he sitting in that group therapy, probably in the next session, he's going to talk about, and I knocked down an elderly woman with my powers. If I have powers, I was on the yellow crystals. God only knows. So I mean, like, he does, it takes him a while to return to that. That's cool. That's a fascinating way of looking at it. What's next? I know we've had like a stellar session here about Bliss, but you're talking about already having other scripts. What do you think is next for you?
We'll see. We'll see. I wrote a movie about robots that I really, really like.
Does it have a title?
No, I'm going to hold back. I don't want to talk about it yet because it's very fresh. I literally just finished it.
Congrats.
but it's cool. It's
okay.
And strangely, you revealed to myself, it is about second chances. It's actually about a split in two. It's cool. It's
awesome. Awesome. You said there were two scripts though. So what was the other one? If the first one was robots,
the other one is I feel like they're like too raw to talk about, but
don't talk about it if you don't feel comfortable. No need to, man.
The other one's science fiction as well, and it's about two parallel timelines kind of happening simultaneously. They're both, again, like that's something I'm interested in. I like changing reality ever so slightly to look at something in humans. But I don't know what's going to happen next. We'll see.
Nobody does. That's the fun of it. Damn it. In our dark cave world. But look, man, you, as usual, been very generous with your time for this extremely deep dive on Bliss. And, I hope people support this and go see it on Amazon Video as well. And look, Mike, I can't wait to see what you do next. It was honestly just great hanging out and chatting with you.
It's such a pleasure. I love speaking with you. I think you have such a wisdom, and you're the way you read films and see films and promote films and push them out into the world. Like, it's a beautiful, beautiful gift that you give the world. And I feel like I'm benefiting from that gift. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, man. Let's make sure it's not too long before the next one. And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to Amazon Studios for making this possible. And of course, to writer-director Mike Cahill for being so ultra generous with his time and so cool about talking about everything about Bliss. I know there's no way you have listened to this entire episode if you have not yet seen Bliss. So I'm not going to tell you to go see it, but make sure to spread the word to your friends to see Bliss as well and support Mike's work, because we want to see more of it, darn it. And speaking of cool things to tell your friends about, I hope you also tell them about Backstory Magazine. We published our latest issue recently over at backstory.net. That's issue 42. There are so many things in there that you could only find in the pages of our magazine that are exclusive. We published Simon Kinberg's first screenplay that he ever sold, along with an interview. We published the screenplay for Joe Carnahan's project, LA 58, that he's still working on. That is just such an awesome read, along with a great interview with him about writing it as well. We have interviews with comic book writers, TV writers, film writers, and directors. So many great things. So you could even read the free issue of Backstory Magazine through our app on an iPad or through backstory.net. And I hope you check that out as well. And look, if you decide after reading us that you want to subscribe, we would love it. And that's why I'm happy to offer you discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory Magazine. You could use that code over at backstory.net. Your credentials will then work for you on an iPad as well, so don't worry about that. You'll still be able to log in on an iPad. But look, it would mean the world to me to have my podcast listeners support my passion project, so thanks for considering subscribing to Backstory Magazine. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2021. All rights reserved. Folks, if you want to reach out to me, you could always drop me a line, yogoldsmith@gmail.com. You could also find me as Yo Goldsmith on Instagram or on Twitter. You could also find me as Backstory_mag on Instagram and Twitter. And yes, I even have a Facebook fan page. And if you want to sign up to get future invites for these special online events that I'm hoping to do more of, you could easily do so by signing up over at backstory.net/events. And please know your email will never be sold to a third party, because no, that's not something I'm in the business of doing. But look, thank you so much again for tuning in. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.